Hello and welcome everyone. Today I want to talk about my league start with ranged Animate Weapon, the new league, and its perks for minion builds. I started out my build as Absolution on the Necromancer, which you have to do because Ethereal Knives no longer produces Lingering Blades, and I played that way until the end of Act 4, at which point I bought Bladefall and Unleash to speed up the summoning process. I got myself the Transfigured gem in the second half of the campaign, and from that point onward I sped through the rest of it and the endgame as well. While ranged animate weapon shares some of the issues with the melee version, like the 2-button playstyle and the weapons despawning on loading screens, the clear speed is generally much faster due to the ranged nature of the minion. The build can be scaled well into the late game, either as life-based with the Covenant, or as CI with the Skin of the Loyal, which is the path I'm taking. The next thing I wanted to talk about are the new ascendancies. The Primalist is optimal for most minion builds, and while there are a lot of different charms to choose from, I wanted to highlight some noteworthy examples. In general, these are based on ascendancy notables, including older versions that are no longer in the game. And this is the list of charms, or rather charm modifiers, that I think are interesting for minion builds. On the Occultist, you have cursed enemies your minions kill have a chance to explode, which helps with the clear speed. Increased effect of your curses. Nearby enemies are chilled, which is probably around 10%. I haven't seen it in-game just yet. Your hexes can affect hexproof enemies, which is really nice while mapping, and can even help when doing invitations, by counteracting the hexproof modifier. The Necromancer can help out with elemental resistances and physical damage reduction. This is especially interesting for non-Necromancer builds, right? Because the Necromancer gets the Commander of Darkness, but on the Ascendant, the Guardian, or let's say even the Champion, you simply don't have access to that. The Necromancer also has a charm that increases the effect of your offerings on you. So for example, when you're running Bone Offering in combination with Mistress of Sacrifice, this increases the block chance that you're getting from it. So if you're missing a couple percent, this might just be the right thing for you. The Elementalist improves the damage you're dealing, especially in elemental builds. So for example, it enhances exposure. In addition to what the Elementalist Ascendancy actually does as well. So this is a really interesting option for builds that actually use that. Shocks have a minimum base damage increase, which is really interesting if you are a build that inflicts shocks but doesn't have the ability to actually scale them very well. You could use that with either Stormblast Mine on an active skill, or just, passively use it to boost Tempest Shield, which does inflict shocks as well. The next important one is the Guardian modifier. While there are at least 5 nearby allies, you nearby allies have Onslaught. This is so good that I would recommend pretty much any build to take this, because the vast majority of minion builds have at least 5 permanent minions, potentially even more on golem builds. And even for the minion builds that don't have that many permanent minions, you're gonna produce minions anyway, right? So the only exception, the only builds that shouldn't take this are the ones that, let's say, an Absolution build that for some reason doesn't use utility minions. That would be an exception, right? Because you never produce 5 minions. Same is true for Reaper builds or Hoa builds, I guess. But all the other ones should definitely get this. And there are some defensive ones on the Guardian, right, that mimic Bastion of Hope, right? Chance to block attack damage if you've attacked recently. And the same for spell damage. Really good stuff, right, if you want to boost your and your minions' survivability. There's also this version of an older modifier, right, that disallows enemies from gaining Power Frenzy and Endurance charges, which is really good, because these scale much more on enemies than they scale on you or your minions. The Gladiator can give you extra block chance, extra maximum block chance, sorry. The Champion can help with banner skills, right? If, let's say, you want to fit Defiance or Dread banner and you don't have the mana for it, then a Champion charm is the right thing for you. The Deadeye, or one of the Deadeye charms, increases the effect of your marks. This is really good. It does work with the newly introduced marks as well. So for example, for penance, the number of phantasms spawned can be scaled. Obviously, you need to hit certain thresholds. Since you're spawning 3 enemies, that would probably be 33% for the first extra enemy. But it's definitely something interesting to keep in mind. On the Pathfinder, you have Flask Shenanigans, Flask Charges, and Flask Effect. On the Chieftain, you get maximum fire resistance and increased strength. This is, of course, very interesting for strength stacking minion builds, specifically the Baron. And there's also a really cool new thing that they're getting, which I'm going to show you in a sec. And last but not least, there is the Juggernaut with movement speed cannot be modified below base value, which is nice, I suppose. But the even better thing is percentage chance to get an endurance charge when you hit. And while this isn't the most reliable way of introducing endurance charge when you're bossing in maps, this means you have 3 endurance charges at all times. So that's really good stuff. In general, as long as you're able to use these charms, as long as you don't rely on playing, let's say, the Warlock Ascendancy for something like Chains of Command or Dominating Blow, then I absolutely recommend to get some charms going for your characters as quickly as possible. As you can see, you can choose whether you want to increase offensive or defensive potential. And this brings me to the last topic of this video, the new Spectres. There are Spectres that can be bought from the Breaker of Oaths or from trade, which can't be desecrated but provide your build with powerful buffs, or are an interesting option for pure Spectre builds due to the high damage they deal. Besides the inability to desecrate the Spectres, there's another drawback to most of these minions, and that is the amount of life they have. A good example of that is the Hydra, which has a range of abilities and also casts Hatred. And while the base damage is very high at level 84, and the abilities scale that damage further, this, first of all, is balanced out by the cooldown the abilities have. Now, I'm not sure if the Hydra doesn't do anything if everything is on cooldown, which definitely can happen later on if you scale attack speed enough. But even without that, there is another huge issue, and that is the life. It's 86% of base monster life. If you compare that to a Primal Crushclaw, which has 500%, and gets around 81,500 life in a highly invested Spectre build, you're gonna find that the Hydra, in comparison, would not even get to 15k. The threshold for survivability against most Ubers is around 35,000 life, 50% block chance each, and at least 83% elemental resistances. This Spectre does not meet these qualifications. And you can obviously scale the life further with, let's say, a Legion Jewel, right? An Elegant Hubris with, let's say, 3 Axiom Wardens, but that's gonna cost you a couple of points. And in general, this is just something I can't really recommend. You can of course try it out, and if you make a cool build with this, you can show it to, well, the entire Minion community, I guess. But for now, I don't really recommend using Spectres that have life values that are this low. And this is why I assembled a short list of Spectres that don't have low life values, that have very high life values, to the point where you never have to care about them. They will not die unless you do something crazy, like, I don't know, going into Ubers with like blue gear or some nonsense, but for the most part, they will be absolutely fine. And we're starting out with the Perfect Blood Demon. And this Spectre applies Corrupting Blood and also consumes those charges. I'm not really sure how powerful this is in terms of damage. Again, the base damage isn't too crazy. The abilities are also not too crazy. Now, it does have this 200% more damage modifier, which is of course really good. But most of the damage is then also converted to fire damage, which is really weird considering that this minion provides a Pride Aura. So yeah, probably not too good for pure damage, but as a support Spectre is really cool. The Pride Aura probably isn't quite as good as the one you would get on the Necromancer with some aura scaling, but the difference wouldn't be too large because you can't actually support Pride with, let's say, Generosity, which is why this is definitely a very interesting option as a Spectre if you have issues fitting Pride into your build otherwise. And as I mentioned before, this is also a super tanky one as well. As you can see here, 120% of base life. This will have probably 100k plus in a high-end build with minion life, so yeah. The next Spectre is the perfect Forest Warrior. This Spectre has a Culling Strike and provides nearby allies with Onslaught. Now, most minion builds probably shouldn't use this. Instead, they should just get the Charm, the Guardian Charm I showed you earlier. But builds like, let's say, Dominating Blow that can use Spectres, but won't be able to use the Primalist Ascendancy, can absolutely use this to get access to Onslaught. This also might free up your weapon slot because you no longer need the Culling Strike from Kingmaker. So that's another cool thing to keep in mind. And yeah, like the other one, very, very survivable. Damage is not that good, but that's fine. The next example is the Perfect Guardian Turtle. It casts Determination, a really powerful one too, and it grants the owner 5% physical damage reduction, percentage base of course. Now I don't know whether this stacks. I would probably say it doesn't, but it might. I'm not quite sure. Further testing is definitely required here. It also buffs the owner with Rongokurai's boon, which in total provided invulnerability while channeling at a totem. And since this minion has this ability as Mary Turtle Invulnerability, I guess this minion actually makes you invulnerable for 2 seconds every 30 seconds. Not sure how smart the AI is about this, right? Whether it uses the ability when you're actually taking a lot of damage. This has to be figured out, but in general, this is really cool. As I said, powerful determination as well, right? So yeah, that in combination with a very high life, amazing utility minion. If you're struggling with physical damage, if you can't fit the determination, get it. The next minion is a bit of a weird one. It releases a Caustic Cloud when hit, which isn't too crazy in my opinion, and it grants the owner's minions 40% increased maximum life. Now you have to understand, this stacks additively with maximum life you already have in your build. So it's probably not the craziest. It does have the advantage of being even more tanky than all the other Spectres. I mean, this is literally 800% of the base life modifier. This thing is going to have like 200,000 at the high end. It's going to be insane. The next Spectre is the Perfect Warlord, which uses a bunch of war cries, casts Vitality, and also shares the endurance charges it gets from its Enduring Cry with nearby allies. We have the Host Incarnate Chieftain for Frenzy and Power Charges, and this thing can now also provide endurance charges. The difference is this will always provide all endurance charges. It also can heal itself for an insane amount of life, right? Insanely powerful. On top of all of that, you also get Vitality, which is, you know, it's some regen, I guess. So yeah, if you're struggling with defenses, once again, really good minion to actually get. Super tanky as well. So for the last utility minion, I want to show you the Perfect Hulking Miscreation. It summons constructs. Now, minions of your minions do not profit from your minion modifiers. They only profit from auras and nearby allies effects, right? So they probably won't be super crazy. I guess they can act as blockers, which is always nice to have. It also scales its own attack damage per armor, but since the damage is not very high and you even have like less damage modifiers on the attacks, this isn't really anything interesting. It also buffs nearby constructs with 100% increased damage and 30% increased attack and cast speed. Now, there aren't any regular minion style constructs as far as I know. So this would then only be useful for Spectres that have the construct tag as well. And while two of the next Spectres I want to show you are constructs, I don't think it's sensible to actually use this as a support Spectre. Instead, it's probably best to just go with an additional offensive Spectre, right? But even outside of that, it has one more thing going for it, and that is an aura that gives nearby allies 20% of physical damage as extra lightning damage. Now, technically, this modifier already exists in the game on the Baronite Cleric. Only Baronite Cleric has a very, very small range. I don't know how it works for the Hulking Miscreation just yet. Either way, as long as you're using melee minions, even the small aura is enough to actually reach them. It probably wouldn't work for something like Absolution though, right? Because the Sentinels tend to be a bit, further away. So, yeah. But for melee minions, if you are doing some sort of like fist to lightning conversion, or you're just playing in an elemental build, let's say SRS or Animate Weapon, this is definitely something that would be interesting. The remaining Spectres are not super interesting as utility minions, with maybe the exception of the first one, because this one gives a Wrath aura, and it also has the modifier lightning damage of nearby allies is lucky. And this means that your damage is rolled twice, which is important for lightning damage because lightning damage has very large ranges. This can be boosted further in attack-based builds when using volatility support, because volatility support scales down the lower rolls, but also scales up the higher rolls, right? Since the values are roughly the same, but the absolute numbers are not, this can obviously, especially with something like lightning damage, give you a lot more damage. And it's made even better if you use this Spectre, because then you're rolling twice, right? Instead of using it as a utility minion, it can also be used as an offensive minion. Once again, very high life, right? 428% of base life. And it's a pure caster minion. It has a Shock Nova, a Spark, and a Lightning Warp ability. So it's somewhat comparable to the Bearded Shamans, which are the lightning-based Goldman casters you meet in the campaign. The difference is that the values are much higher. The Shock Nova at Spectre level 84 deals 10,000 damage and has a 100% chance to shock enemies. Really powerful stuff. It also has a cooldown, unlike the one on the Bearded Shamans. So this is probably not the main ability that you should be scaling. The same is true for the Lightning Warp, that also has a cooldown, although this one is much shorter with 2 seconds. And it deals a lot of damage too, right? Roughly 9,000 on average. The thing is, what the Spectre is mostly going to use is the Spark ability. And this Spark is a lot more powerful than the one you find on the Bearded Shaman. The factor is like 2.5 in terms of damage. And then you get 2 extra projectiles. You also get faster projectiles. So this really is the most powerful version of that minion. Now the thing with Spark is that it heavily depends on the environment. For example, Spark and this minion, because of that, is probably best supported with greater multiple projectiles and Pierce when fighting in closed arenas, like let's say the Maven arena or invitations from the Maven, right? Potentially even something like the Eta arena. Now we can't really scale the base duration or the projectile speed without sacrificing gem sockets, so that's something I don't recommend. The thing is, even in open arenas, we could probably just use generic damage scaling support gems, which wouldn't be as good for Spark, right? But would then also scale the other abilities. And this minion definitely has the potential to become an absolute powerhouse. And unlike the Hydra, it doesn't have these issues with the life. Right? Once again, 430% of base life. Really good stuff. Might even try it out myself. Not quite sure yet. The next minion, or rather the next Spectre, is even more interesting, because this, the Perfect Shadow Construct, is literally the Vaal Oversoul. Yes, that is the enemy you fight at the end of Act 2. And it gets all of its abilities as well. So, first of all, super survivable again, right? 460% of base life. It has the Rock Slide, and this is the only ability of that minion that also has a cooldown time. so everything else can just be used. I'm not sure how the AI really decides which ability to use. This is something that would have to be tested. The Rockslide deals physical damage and repeats a lot. The other ability is this Oversoul Spray. This is casting the projectiles that produces the cold dot areas that can be seen here. So the cold dots don't really do that much damage. I guess they create chilling areas for the most part. This is what it's all about. What is more interesting is the Slam, which is this ability as Mary Oversoul Explosion Ignite. So it can't deal critical strikes, which sucks, right? Because that's a hugely important way of scaling minion damage. It does have 100% more attack damage. Now it's a bit weird. It has a spell tag here, but then says more attack damage here. I'm not quite sure which it would end up being. I reckon it would end up being an attack. Not quite sure though. Either way, it deals physical damage that is then converted to fire, 50% of it. Has a high ignite chance, increased ignite duration, and deals 500% more damage with ignite. Now once again, without actually seeing numbers, it's hard to assess this. This might be the only minion where ignite scaling is actually interesting. Not quite sure just yet. It's probably not a good idea to focus all in onto the ignite, right? Instead, just scale damage generically, elemental damage, right? This is dealing triple split damage, and it's probably best supported by something like a Triad Grip to convert what physical damage remains into elemental damage. And this is also true for the next ability, right? The Laser. This thing deals an insane amount of damage, right? Around 12k. It repeats twice, has 100% chance to shock, and has 20% maximum effect of shock. Now I don't really know whether we're actually going to see 70% shocks. I very much doubt that, but this will be very powerful. Make no mistake. The best way of playing this is probably on a Guardian build with the Elemental Relics, and then, as I said before, using a Triad Grip and then converting most of the damage to cold to make most use of the Hatred aura. But yeah, before we see actual numbers, hard to judge, right? Definitely something worth mentioning though, in my opinion. The next minion is even more weird, right? The Perfect Dark Marionette. It reforms after being killed, and it explodes on death for 5% of life as fist, fire, and lightning damage. And explosion scorches. Huh, that's interesting. What could we use this for? Maybe minion instability? The thing is, you don't have a good way of killing Spectres, right? At least you didn't used to have a good way of killing Spectres, because Infernal Legion is very slow, especially if you also want to scale, let's say, fire resistance with the Formless Inferno to increase the life of your minions. The thing is, since we're in an Affliction League, we actually have something that allows us to blow up our minions. We have Affliction. You can simply use the Warlord Ascendancy and then afflict your minions, and they will explode. Now the thing is, this usually works by exploding your minions once they hit 20%, and then it deals physical damage. But since this explosion scorches, it's probably actually best played as a damage conversion build with the Triad Grip that converts the damage to fire, and then also speccing minion instability. If I understand Affliction and minion instability correctly, then it should trigger minion instability first, so you get just fire damage. On top of the minion instability, you would also get this stuff, right? Which is an additional, I don't know, 15%, if I understand this correctly, of elemental damage. Again, we don't really scale the lightning damage, but that would be another 10% fire damage based on minion life. The Spectre also has decent minion life, right? It's not as crazy as the others, but remember, you're playing this in a build that scales minion life, right? Formless Inferno, let's say 200% fire resistance on your minions, right? To increase minion life. So, yeah, really good. If you've ever wanted to play a minion instability Spectre build, this is the league. And this brings me to the last Spectre, another offensive Spectre, and this one is even more peculiar than the last one, because this Spectre, the perfect runic skeleton, has 20% increased physical weapon damage per 10 strength. Is there a way to actually give that minion strength? And if so, how much? And the answer is yes. There's the Baron. Now, the Baron has traditionally been a exclusive zombie build, because it also scales zombie numbers, because you have the zombie leech modifier on it. But in this case, we actually have a non-zombie build that can use the Baron. Instead of the regular damage scaling per strength, this minion gets 20% per 10 strength. If you get 1000 strength on your character, your minions will get 500, and this minion will thus get 1000% increased physical weapon damage. On top of that, it also crushes enemies, so Awakened Brutality isn't required, opening up support options, for example, Impale support, really good stuff. The owner also gains more physical attack damage, but I think this is, for the most part, irrelevant. Now, the base damage of this minion isn't too high. It's, what was that, a third of the Hydra, if I remember correctly. And it's a pure melee minion. It does have an additional heavy melee attack that deals 50% more damage, which has a cooldown, right? But then we can use multi-strike, so the minion can use it a bit more often. It also has a cleave, but this has an even larger cooldown. So yeah, personally, I think you probably need to use melee splash to clear maps. But yeah, I mean, you ever wanted to play a Baron build with Spectres, this is your only chance at doing so. And this is pretty much it for now. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can leave them in the comments. I try to get to them as soon as I can. If you want to support my work or connect with me and my community, you can check out my socials including Twitch, Discord, and Patreon on my channel page on the description of this video. Hope you liked it, and I'm going to leave you with the Maven boss fight. Until next time.
Space aligns. Behold your connection.
I have what I want. Death will not be an escape. Scurry, scurry. Cascade of pain. Stand still.
Resistance will be punished. Time retorts. Scurry. Scurry.
My irritation is growing. Death will not be an escape. Scurry, scurry. Stand still. Cascade of pain.
Stop resisting. Reality bends. Punishment